hello. Hi, Zoe. How are you doing?
Hi, Michael. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is awesome. It's great to see you. Um, so I have various wide-ranging questions about Pussypedia. My first question would be, like, what were you thinking, and what were the general like ideas behind the creation of Pussypedia?
The idea is that there's just not enough high quality, accessible information about our bodies out there. That there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it's totally wrong. And then there's medical information and research that's like behind paywalls, not really possible to understand without a medical training, science background, and sort of like very little in between. And so the idea is like that we really need a lot of information about our bodies because we don't have it, and it's relevant for a lot of reasons, being like you need to know how to take care of your body, you need to know what is marketing bullshit that's like been telling us to like use these products that are actually not good for us or just are unnecessary, because not knowing about your body and it being a mystery causes a lot of shame for a lot of people, that shame is just disempowering and that health is empowering, and
Yeah.
there's so many reasons that we need information about our bodies. And also like a lot of things are just like done in this way that doesn't really address shame. Like it's really hard to learn about anything when like you're actively feeling shame, and talking about our vaginas often causes people shame. Just even the word vagina is embarrassing to people, because it's such a taboo and there's so much stigma around them being ugly, stinky, dirty, all these things. And so we wanted to address both like the information gap and the shame around our bodies.
Okay, so when we first spoke, you mentioned a very interesting story about how you first came to this process, which was an interaction with an ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, like he was always trying to make me squirt, like it was his primary sexual objective. And I was like, my body just doesn't do that. Like I don't think it does that. And he's
Mhm.
like, every woman can squirt and I've always been able to make it. I'm like, okay, first of all, this is about you and not
Yes.
about my pleasure. And secondly, like, no, I don't think that's true. So I started Googling, can all women squirt? And it just like found a ton of dumbass information. So I started reading some journal articles, and it was really hard to understand. And I was just trying to understand where my bladder was in relation to my vagina. And it was so hard to figure that out on the internet. And I was like, whoa, like this is a huge problem. We need more information about our bodies.
Absolutely. So, uh, I may be reading this, but I hear a lot of a kind of pragmatic understanding. You described sort of simplifying the terms and understanding for people. Where did that drive come from? In our previous conversation, you mentioned that you had been working on this in other subjects. Um, were there any primary influences, or was this just a natural impulse that you had?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I've never felt like a smart kid. Like I never felt like a smart kid in school. Like
Mhm.
I couldn't like hold big complex concepts in my brain very easily, or like I hate reading philosophy. It
Yeah.
makes me feel dumb, like, and or can't do math, bad standardized testing scores and stuff. But like I do give myself time and take things slowly, and then I can digest them, and when I get to the point where I understand it, I feel really good. And I suppose that I like wanted to share that experience with other people, like who maybe don't think that they're smart people, but that they really can arrive at understandings of complex concepts. And um, yeah, I think it has something to do with that. And also because I like felt like people don't care, like when I was young and more passionately radical, I was like constantly like feeling like, like, why don't you care? Like, nobody cares about this stuff. Like, I got pulled out of class in college, and my professor was like, you're alienating your classmates, you know? And so, like, I think that part of me thought, like, if they understood more, they would care. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think those two things.
Okay, that's very fascinating. I mean, one of our primary concerns at Text of the Matter is like reading through these sort of opaque texts and trying to pull out of them the actual concepts and what they're actually saying about thinking or doing or being or becoming
Yeah,
or
that's why I
whatever.
really like. I mean, I think that, yeah, I think we're trying to do similar things, which is like make things that we think are awesome accessible to more people.
Yeah, I think you have uh, gotten to the point in a better way, and I find various elements very interesting. Like, um, there's a lot of difficulty around women's self-identity, right, and how it is defined in our social context, particularly the American social context. I can admit to myself that I am a reformed fuckboy, and I, you know, eh, my thinking about women was dominated by these uh, cultural presumptions developed around pornography, developed around, mythology, etc. And so, how did you directly approach those type of social structures with your
Yeah.
book?
So I tried to show where they came from. Like, where did these ideas, where did they start? Like, if we can identify how these ideas started and how they get perpetuated, I thought like it will expose them as false, as manufactured, right? Like, for example, if we think about hysteria, like the idea that women are hysterical. Where does that come from? So I trace the idea all the way back to like ancient Greece and how it's been replicated, and when it was finally taken out of the DSM in the 80s.
Yes, yes,
And the definition of it is like women who we can't figure out what's wrong with them, they're faking it, and
yes,
they're doing it to get out of doing chores. And like the definition hadn't really changed. And like, well, why is it in the patriarchy's interest to further these ideas? Like, well, it's pretty simple. It keeps women out of power. It's just, disenfranchising to,
yeah,
you know, people. If you say like, oh, well, they can't hold positions of power because they're irrational, and it's also a very handy tool to discredit people who speak out against the patriarchy, right? So it's like, I'm mad because there is injustice being inflicted on me. And it's like, oh, you're just hysterical. And it's like the same trope as like when people say, like, oh, angry Black women,
I was
right?
about
Like,
to say the
oh,
same thing. Yeah,
yeah. So when it's like, oh, they're just angry, it's like, no, they're angry because they're being treated like shit, and that provokes anger. I don't know
y-
if you've ever been treated like shit, but it provokes anger. So it's like,
yeah,
it's this, and so the way that like the racist white supremacist, patriarchy, like discredits people who are trying to point it out is
yes,
by saying it's a pathology. You're just like that.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
so trying to trace these ideas back to where they came from, A, and B, to point out why they're useful to maintaining like the power structure as it is.
Absolutely. So while you were researching all of these concepts, what were some of those that were particularly surprising to you beyond, say, the genealogy of hysteria?
Well, one thing that I really didn't know about that I think is wild, and this is not to gaslight anyone who experiences PMS, because I certainly experience PMS. Like, I've woken up so many times with my period and just been like morbidly embarrassed about the meltdown I had the day before, or
Hmm.
like, you know, in my, like, to my partners, my parents, my like bosses, like, and certainly have experienced it as a real thing. But when you go back and look at the history of PMS research, it's terrible. It makes no sense. Basically, it starts off as something very akin to hysteria. It's like the first like medical mention of it. And then the first study, the study credited with, establishing that concept, it was looking at women in police stations and hospitals. So like places where bad things are already happening, and
Yeah.
it was counting anything that happened 2 weeks before or after their menstrual cycle. So it's like, wait, 2 + 2, that's the whole month. So
Yes.
it's like counting anything. So like,
Wow.
yeah, so it's looking at anything bad that happened to people who were in police stations and hospitals and attributing that all of it to their menstrual cycles. And it's like, that's a crazy study design. That does not make sense.
That is
And
incredible.
then if you look at like the next studies, they are similarly flawed for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of cherry picking going on with just picking sorry,
Sorry, doggo.
I'm gonna give this a second and we can start
No
again.
worries.
Hold on. Sorry.
No worries.
The water, like there was like a guy that delivered water to everyone in the neighborhood, and he's like gone for some reason. So now like 5 different water businesses are trying to like take
Uh,
over, and every day like 2 people are knocking on the door asking if we want to buy water.
oh,
It's okay.
well, you get
Anyway,
some dog barks.
so then this tool is invented to try to like standardize the way people are trying to measure PMS. And the tool is a survey, and it's like, please describe your PMS symptoms. And it's like 57 negative terms you can pick from, and like 4 good ones,
Okay.
and no neutral
So
ones.
it's
So
priming.
it's priming, exactly, in a huge way. And this instrument becomes the instrument for decades. People are writing about how it's a shitty instrument. Also, like, they're not comparing these results to men. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, maybe we have emotional cycles and it's not linked to our menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
And also, people weren't, there was a lot of study design flaws going on. Anyway, in the 90s, this team of researchers started to do literature reviews looking back at studies, looking for studies that did not have all of these design flaws. And when they did that and did these meta-analyses, like looks like about 17% of people experience emotional PMS symptoms. The
Okay.
physical symptoms are much more well established: the bloating, tiredness, also like your immune system dips. So that's also something I didn't know, which is fascinating. Like your immune
Your immune system does.
ebbs and flows with your menstrual cycle, which is a hugely useful piece of information, I think. So like people with autoimmune diseases, they experience like their symptoms are alleviated during PMS. And people with other kinds of chronic diseases, they experience like more symptoms.
Wow.
And a lot of people get a cold before their period. Anyway, so it basically looks like PMS is not this thing that everyone has, and it's not even really clear that it's tied more to the menstrual cycle than to our ideas about the menstrual cycle. Because, and this is like one of my favorite studies that had a pretty big sample size, but I don't remember the number, but women who identify as more like stereotypically feminine report having much more PMS.
Yeah.
And the
Well,
author,
oh, sorry. Go on.
so the authors like sort of hypothesize that it's about like when you're like very feminine, you don't have a way of expressing anger or negative emotions because it's not ladylike. And then this PMSing is like a way like that you can have these experiences publicly without being less feminine.
Okay. See,
Yeah.
while I was listening to you, yeah, I got this sense of, we create largely what is a social construct around PMS, and
Mm-hmm.
what would be normally bothersome experiences. I know when I get a cold, I get crabby, right?
Yeah.
Like when I get sick or injured, it makes me more frustrated. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of, as you said, pathologizing what could be natural frustrations, or making someone almost have a placebo effect where
I think it's a huge amount of that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I
okay,
think these narratives are informing how we experience our bodies,
uh, in-
basically. Like, I
that
talked to a few women from the Soviet Union, and they didn't have a concept of PMS.
ah
And they're like, no, I never experienced it, never heard of it. We didn't have a word for it. It's just not a thing. And one of them was so funny. She's like, this is a problem for American women who don't have real problems.
yeah. I mean, and I think there is a larger indication in your work about how, uh, in the American context, but in the patriarchal context in total, that there are many different psychological states, physical states attributed to women that are constructed, that are, you know, at least fluid.
Yeah,
And that was something that was illuminating in looking at parts of your text. I have not read every single section, but I've read many of them.
it's long.
um, Now, one thing that really amazed me about the book was the aesthetic, right? It's both beautiful and confrontational, right? It puts the pussy out front, right? And you have
It does.
on your website and in the book this kind of affirmation of the term. Where did that
Mhm.
come from, and what was your intention behind that?
What the word pussy, like deciding to use the word pussy was because we didn't have a word. It was like, okay, well, vagina's misused. Like, there's this kind of movement against the word vagina because it really only refers to the canal. And like, what about, people are like, call it the vulva. And I'm like, but what if I also want to talk about the vagina? Because the vulva is just the stuff on the outside. And like, what about the internal clitoris? And like,
Hmm.
there's not a good word. It's like not having a word for leg or something. Like, it's
Yes.
yeah, so it's like crazy that we don't have a word. And pussy was a good option because, like, A, it's not a medical term, so it didn't have a pre-established like medical definition, so we could sort of give it one. And B, like, it's a bad word, which is fun.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, yeah, we want people to feel uncomfortable and then ask themselves why they feel uncomfortable. Because like the word fuck is also a bad word, but it doesn't make people nearly as uncomfortable as the word pussy.
Very true.
And the word pussy makes people uncomfortable because it means vagina, and vaginas make people uncomfortable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so so you develop this concept of pussy, and then you create a lot of art showing women in nude, but not in a way that is immediately eroticized, or if it is eroticized, it is in a way that is unique and singular to whatever it is that you're explaining. How did you kind of interface with the artists or artist to develop this larger style?
Yeah, this is Maria. It's all her. I mean, really, I don't like, it's, I can't take any credit. Maria's work was sort of trying to do that before we started Pussypedia together, and that's why I called her to do the project with me, because like her work is like looking for a new way of portraying like the female, air quotes, female body. And I loved what she was doing. I always thought it was brilliant, and I think that she just brought so much like joy to these images, like the masturbation one, where it's like
Yeah.
in the clouds, and it's just like so like this is a great thing to do, and it's just like I don't even know how art works. I don't know why I look at that image and it makes me feel happy and empowered, but it just does,
But
you
that it
know?
does is important, like
Yeah.
how you look at, like, a women's health journal, or you look at a fashion magazine, and they have very particular images towards commodities, and they sexualize towards selling, and this doesn't. It appears to be very, like, integral to the understanding of whatever you're looking at. There's almost a reciprocal relationship between the images and the ideas, which I found
Yeah,
quite
definitely.
wonderful. Um,
Yeah,
so
Maria is a genius. I I told her the like first time I saw her work, I was like, I'm the president of your fan club. And then followed that up with like, but like not in like a Selena kind of way. Yeah.
So I wonder, now that you have written Pussypedia and you aren't adding articles at this moment, correct?
We're not, no, because we're burnt out a little bit in
Yeah,
what we're doing.
absolutely. I mean, it was
Yeah.
a massive undertaking. So, since you have produced it, have you seen anything, trends, concepts, tendencies in society and in culture that have made you think, man, that would be good content for Pussypedia?
Mm, I mean, yeah, I think that we're part of a bigger movement for sure, and a lot of people that are trying to fight stigma attached to vaginas. And there's so many like amazing artists with Instagram projects that are like normalizing our bodies and showing them. I think just showing them is so important. The art of Sophia Wallace, who did the Clitoracy project and movement, is like hugely formational for us. And um, like Hilda Atalanta, who does what's it called? It's just an amazing like. Let me find it.
Okay.
Mm, the Vulva Gallery on
The Vulva
Instagram. Yeah,
Gallery. Okay.
the Vulva Gallery, and it's amazing. Just all watercolors of vulvas and just all of their different shapes and sizes and forms and colors, and it's beautiful. And yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot out there now, and more all the time, and it feels really good to see that other people agree with our that there's just other people out there being like, fucking Christ, like we need to see this stuff. I mean, like, how many times did you see a drawing of a penis between the ages of like 5 and 15? How many
Yes.
times did someone draw a penis on something? And then, like, think about if someone had drawn a vagina, what kind of stir and embarrassment it would have shaken up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like the
Yeah,
penis was like the universal symbol of fucking with somebody, and
exactly.
and there's something telling about our comfort with the penis, with phallic
The
design in
penis game,
general.
like remember the penis game of where it's like someone says penis and then you say it louder and louder, penis, penis, and then like everyone's like yelling like penis. Like we never would have done that with the word vagina. It would have
Yeah.
been unthinkable.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so um give me 1 second. I had another question. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go to an earlier question that I had. Um, so when you were doing the work, did you find any actual precursors or any good science that you felt like actually aided in the project rather than be an obstruction to it or an obfuscation of what was the truth?
Yeah, I think like a big starting point for us is the website Scarleteen, which is for teenagers, but it's like first of all, it was the first queer sex ed website,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, it's the first idea of having queer inclusive sex ed at all, which is just like pretty legendary to me.
Uh-huh.
And it's also very sex positive, even though it's for teenagers, which is also like super fucking revolutionary, especially because it started like I think almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and so super ahead of its time and really high quality information. And yeah, it's like for teenagers, but it's for everyone. So that's an amazing project. It's started by Heather Corinna, who wrote the foreword for Pussypedia.
Oh, really?
And yeah, yeah,
That must have
and
been an exciting connection to make,
oh
right?
my God, yeah, Heather is an amazing person, and I feel like so lucky. I mean, we met through like my dad's ex-girlfriend, and um, I went to their house and we talked for like hours the first time we met, and it's just been so exciting to continue to learn from Heather. Um, and what else? I mean, the work of like a few scientists, Dr. Beverly Whipple, who is sort of established like what that female ejaculation exists.
Okay.
Female air quotes, at the
Yeah.
time it was called female ejaculation. And yeah, her work is like super foundational to establishing what the G spot is. She wrote the book The G Spot that like popularized the
Oh, yeah,
concept
yeah,
of the
yeah,
G
yeah.
spot. Yeah, she's a neuroscientist, and she's just so cool, and she was really generous with me when I was writing the book in terms of like giving me interviews, reviewing my work. um, and yeah, so that was very cool. And even though like I think that the style of like the profanity and like all the swear words and stuff, like I think that was like pretty weird and like new for her.
Yeah.
And even sort of the feminism, like not that she's not a feminist, of course she is, but like she's very old now. I think she's in her 80s, and so sort of like this way when I would be like, well, why do we call it a female prostate? It's just a prostate. Like we don't say the female liver and stuff. And she'd be like,
Yeah.
like because it's a huge deal that there is also a prostate in the female body, like
Yeah.
so things like that. It was cool to like have that kind of intergenerational like dialogue with her.
Yeah.
um
Do you think there is a particular kind of new feminism that is attached to your work that separates it from feminism of the past? Was there any conflict in the ideas of the past in
I
comparison
mean,
now?
I think that like when I researched the book and wrote into the book, like I tried to like be intersectional and talk about how like the history of like forced sterilization on people of color, and make it more intersectional. But I was saying like that the second wave of feminism was not intersectional, and since then I've read um, this long biography of Adrienne Rich, and more of
Oh,
like
yes.
learning more about how she was so close with Audre Lorde, and like they were absolutely trying really hard to be intersectional, and I was kind of wrong. And I think it's like a narrative, like self-serving narrative too, like, oh well, now we're intersectional, and it's like actually they were doing really cool stuff to be intersectional back then too. And they also
Yes.
messed it up a lot, like the National Organization of Women like lobbied against these reforms to institute these like mandatory waiting periods for sterilization, which was like, why are you doing that? Like hundreds of thousands of people are being forcibly sterilized every year. It's like, oh, because you're white and you don't know about that, or you don't care. And like
Yeah.
so there were fails. Like that's a really good story, a case study in why social movements should be intersectional.
Yeah. And
But I
it
don't.
and you also kind of demonstrate a historical gray area where we have to be critical about our history. We can understand that there was a lack of intersection while understanding that like there has to be a precursor to even get to this point where we can have intersection of concepts.
Exactly, totally.
Yeah.
And I try to talk a lot about like sort of how narratives shape our understanding of reality, which isn't new, but I trying to bring it into feminism as much as possible. Like, um, and it is sort of, you could say that feminism like started that, so it's not new for me to be bringing that in, but I'm trying to incorporate it as much as I can into like a more like popular form of feminism, because I feel like that idea is so useful and like can like help you in every area of your life, make your experience more rich, and by being able to question it. And it's like something I learned in classes where I was trying to read texts that were really hard to read.
Yes.
Yeah, and like really just valued that so much. Um,
I I notice throughout there is this engagement with scientific literature directly with the neuroscientists. Um, are there like general reforms or at least like a concept of reform that you imagine would improve conditions for understanding sexual health problems, various psychological ideas, etc.?
I like policy.
Yes, yeah. Is
Stop being dumb. I don't know.
it is it
I
really
don't know.
just that you have to have women with more power
Yeah,
to have representation of that, of
you need to
those
have women
realities?
but that's not going to solve it because women have internalized the
Exactly.
patriarchy as well. So,
Yes.
it's about like, well, I don't know, like looking at the National Institutes of Health and what research is funded and what's not funded. Um, I think that there has to be some kind of effort to, you know, conscious effort to fund more research about pussies. There's things that we don't know that are just unthinkable, that we still don't know them, like, really what the shape of the prostate is, how it works, what hole its fluid comes out of. Like, have somebody get a magnifying glass and watch somebody masturbate. Like, this seems imminently
Yeah.
solvable. Like, um, yeah, I don't know what else. I mean,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
hope that work like this and work like even just people painting vulvas on Instagram, like the more we normalize it, the more we take down the taboo, the more like it will change culture, and like eventually the little girls who grow up with less embarrassment around vaginas will be in the rooms where these decisions are getting made.
very clear and very true. So I have one last question for you, and it's a little bit more abstract. In a lot of philosophy, right? Particularly what would be called postmodern or post-structuralist philosophy, there's this concept of difference, and many of the feminist writers wrote of this sort of fluid concept of sexual difference, right? The difference between the feminine and the masculine, right? Now, obviously, they were talking about this in terms of it being constructed, but they were also talking about something that was, real and actual,
Mhm.
right? Um, do you have an idea of what sexual differences beyond the power dynamics? Like, did this reveal anything to you about womanhood itself that you found interesting?
I think that our physical parts are more similar than I ever knew in so many incredible ways.
Yeah.
Our bodies work so similarly. I mean, a penis and a clitoris, it's like the exact same thing, just like a little bit structured a little bit differently. It's all the same parts that all work the same ways, and they're about the same size. Literally 9 centimeters on average. Like, it's um, but with difference, I think um, actually, like, okay, I'm gonna give a physiological difference. There's like the ways that we're socialized differently, but I'm less excited about them than this, and I'll
Yes.
I'll end with this. After a penis ejaculates, it has to kind of start over,
Hmm.
but after a clitoris orgasms, it doesn't go back to baseline. It goes back to like still pretty excited, and it doesn't lose its boner. And that's why people with clitorises can have multiple orgasms, which is kind of like, there's a physiological difference. That's not a social construct. Like, ha ha
Lucky.
ha. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why a lot of like a lot of theorists in the like who studied this stuff came to these like savagely misogynist conclusions that like the reason women must be oppressed is because like otherwise they would go nuts, because they have such
oh,
sexual desire, and they
yeah.
would just go crazy.
There would just
Yeah.
be orgasms everywhere in the
Yeah. Yeah.
streets,
It
on the
would be a
bus.
mess.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Zoe, this has been a wonderful conversation. I love the concrete information. I love the beauty of the text. I suggest that everyone get a copy. It's a beautiful book, sublime book. And I thank you very much for speaking with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to talk to you.
Yeah, it's always wonderful to see you, Zoe. I hope that
Likewise.
you can come back and maybe we talk about another specific topic or some other future work that you do. Um,
Let's do it. I hope
all
so
right.
too.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. This has been Virtual Matter episode 2 with Zoe Mendelson. Thank you.